Hello, everyone. Um, Good afternoon. I'm Ashwin. I head marketing at MoEngage, and I'm going to be your host for today's fireside chat. I have Damandeep Singh Soni with me, so I'm really excited to talk to him. He comes with a wealth of experience of driving growth in mobile-first brands. Now, before we actually begin the session, let's do a quick technical check. So, if you can hear me, can you please click on the raise hand option that's on the right hand side of your screen, just to make sure that everybody can see me and everybody can hear me? Can all the participants in the webinar just click on the raise hand symbol? Okay, I see one person. Okay, I see a few of them raising their hands. Okay, yep, awesome. So looks like people can hear me and people can see me and Daman, so that's awesome. So we're good to go. Um, So awesome, excellent. So hey, thank you all of you for joining me, and thank you, Daman, for joining with us today. So we're going to be talking about marketing automation and how that can fuel growth for mobile-first companies, right? So this is a live fireside chat; it's not recorded, and we'll walk, and we'll walk together with some of the common questions you might have around marketing automation. We have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we will answer any questions that you might have. So as we go through the fireside chat of the webinar, feel free to key in your questions via the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. All right? And we will get to those questions at the end of the webinar. And another important information, we are recording this webinar, and we will share a recording of this webinar to anyone who's online today with us. All right, excellent. So for those of you in the audience who are new to MoEngage, I'm just going to give you like a shameless 30-second plug. We are an intelligent customer engagement platform that helps consumer brands build meaningful conversations with their users across web, email, and the mobile channels, right? So that's pretty much us. All right, excellent. So let's get this started. First of all, Daman, great to have you here again. Hey, thank you so much for your time with us today. Why don't you kind of quickly go through, could you give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself, what you've done, what's your background, and then we can get started with the questions.
Sure. Thanks, Ashwin, for having me here, and thanks to the MoEngage gang to organize this webinar. I hope it's of some help to all the folks listening in. Quick background about myself. I've been a marketer for the longest time now. But the fun thing is, I've had a ringside, or rather a battleground seat, to see how digital marketing and marketing in the digital realm has evolved, right from the time of 2G days to today, when the smartphone penetration is reasonably well. And not only that, when I used to I used to run a digital agency a long time ago, and we used to handle digital marketing for some of the brands like Harvard Business School, Schneider, and FedEx. Things were pretty different back then. Right up to the time when I was heading Line Messenger for India, we did not have many marketing automation tools that we're talking about today. We used to write a lot of code to automate a lot of the marketing, and I learned a thing or two from the Japanese about how they develop dashboards, and I think that is something I carry with me even today. Till recently, I used to be the growth head for Mobikwik, wherein Mobikwik being the underdogs, we had to really sweat the asset, and I think that's the fun of being a marketer. Sometimes you have lots of budgets to play around with, and you go and hire a brand ambassador, and sometimes you really have to sweat the asset. I think at Mobikwik, I got to see a bunch of both the worlds. These days, I consult a lot of startups on how they should configure their growth teams, how they should build out their marketing automation platforms, and how they can look at the entire funnel while driving growth for their companies. Glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks. And it's really interesting, Daman. I mean, if you've gone through the entire journey, from the desktop world, from the early days of the internet, and all the way till now, when there's a lot of mobile penetration. Having said that, what's your most favorite app?
What's my most favorite app? I think the amount of time I spend on WhatsApp, nothing, no other app comes close to it. Frankly, email has become obsolete for me by virtue of WhatsApp being an integral part of my life. So I think I would go with WhatsApp as being my favorite app as of today.
Uh, okay, so it's purely functional, right? So it's just WhatsApp.
It's not functional. I mean, all my friends are there, all my family is there, all the crappy jokes I have to share. I think that's the medium that I go to today. It sounds pretty boring, but yeah, I think asynchronous communication is something which really takes a better part of my time throughout the day.
Awesome, 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 excellent. So I think, and thanks a lot for that introduction, Daman. So we're going to quickly talk a little bit. So we're going to quickly dive into the marketing automation part of it. Now, I'm sure most of the folks in the audience, I mean, they're familiar with marketing automation. They're either trying to implement some kind of a marketing automation solution, or they already have a bunch of marketing automation tools or marketing tools which they're using. Um, so they have a bunch of data at their disposal. They're collecting a lot of information and all of that stuff. So my first question is, obviously when we talk about automation, the first picture that comes to our mind is, hey, it can save costs. How does marketing automation actually help with customer experience apart from the whole saving?
Sure. So, see, one of the things about marketing automation, one of the big uh, features about it is making marketing scalable. And as marketeers, what are some of the things that we do? We create a brand for the service or product that we're marketing. We put it out there for the users to understand what our value proposition is, and so that they can interact with our brand and consume our product and services. In the digital realm, specifically on the mobile side of things, if you don't automate, I mean, scalability becomes a big issue. Today, every user persona is different. Everyone wants to be spoken into with the language what they are familiar with. Uh, so if you try to do that manually, it becomes frankly impossible today. And thankfully, we live in times when technology can help us do mass personalization in a very meaningful and efficient way. So, and all this ties down to customer experience. Let me give a simple example. Something as simple as channel optimization, which means that as a user, I'm more prone to responding to a notification as opposed to an email, because I don't like my email, my inbox to be full of junk. So today, tools enable you to figure out uh, using machine learning that what kind of users would want a notification and what kind of users would want, and which user would want an email. Not only that, there is also send time optimization. For example, some users are more responsive to, let's say, a notification in the early part of the day from your app as opposed to the later part of the day. So then I can also time my communication with them during the time that it's convenient to them. So stuff like this is what tools like marketing automation really help us enable. Not only that, I mean, when it comes to customer experience, even something as simple as onboarding, each user is on a different curve of learning. Some users get to experiencing all the key features of your app pretty fast. I mean, won't we don't we love all those kind of users? But there are some users who need to be guided to different parts of the app. And as a marketer, that's what our main job is, right? Our job is to make the user experience different parts of a service, and then hope that there's a product market fit, and then that takes off from there. So even onboarding the user is something which really can be personalized on an individual level. I think tools like this really help us achieve that.
So I think, and Daman, thanks a lot for that. So when you talk about the whole personalization part of it, and being at the in the moment touch point, right? Like a push notification, and how a user is most likely to act upon a push notification post, or as compared to an to an email part of it. So talk about market automation. Um, how do you actually um, go about implementing it, right? I mean, one thing about automation is, look, it can amplify both the good and the bad in your processes, right? So how do you actually get started with marketing automation? Because you don't want to amplify or automate the bad parts of your marketing, right? You only want to amplify or automate the good part of it. So how do you actually get started with marketing automation? How do you decide which process gets automated and which one doesn't, and all of that stuff?
Yeah, sure. See, today there are new channels opening up almost on a daily basis. There are new platforms available to the marketer almost on a daily basis. For example, in India, Snapchat did not exist as a channel to market
Right.
probably 6 months ago. Facebook started a new ad unit which did not exist 6 months ago, and they shut down a certain channel a few months ago. So the environment is constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
To start out with what processes to automate and what to automate, I think first you need to understand what the organization goals are, and what will help the team scale up. So first things first is map out the existing marketing environment in your company. Is if there is a huge user base coming in and you need to automate user acquisition and onboarding, and I think then attack for that first. But if you think that the user base is not that much, I mean, suppose you're working for a SaaS company, but retention is a big part of the problem, then I would rather look at retention as one of the main things to look at. Having said that, start small. Typically, you start with a point solution wherein you can automate one part of the process, uh, and attack that part of the process which will help you move the needle really well. Uh, for example, when I joined Mobikwik, we felt that we are really going to scale up pretty fast, and we need to ensure that the whole onboarding process has to really be automated so that people can get into the funnel pretty fast. That's
Mm-hmm.
the first thing that we automated. But once and to do that, we improved the sign up funnel by 40%, but just by doing a few hacks, and once the whole marketing automation went live.
Wow.
Post that, we felt, okay, now the users are coming in. Now let's start retaining the users and making sure that we can do a cross sell, upsell. And for that, we then invested in a whole solution so that we can scale up the organization. The important thing here is not, to make sure that you do not have a technology soup with you. To make sure that you identify a system which is scalable, and which you can bolt on more and more systems. But along with the environment, and this is going to be a slightly longish answer because there are a lot of aspects to it. I think it's very important to get stakeholder buy-in. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
you do need to get your CEO on board, but more importantly is to get the CTO and the product teams also on board. Because believe me, the marketing automation system is going to become the nervous system of the company within 6 months of you implementing the same.
Got it. Daman?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So, so once you've got your stakeholders aligned, I think you then need to plan your implementation. See, marketing automation is a key skill. Okay, it is. I cannot emphasize the importance of building consensus to drive motivation. So what that means is that your product teams need to work hand in glove with the marketing and the growth teams. Otherwise, this system is not going to scale. This will also impact a lot of processes. So you will also have to invest a decent amount of time in training your folks with the system, because once the system comes in, it's just not the marketing folks who are going to be using your marketing automation system, but also your sales and product folks who are going to be looking at it on a day-to-day basis. In fact, even your technology folks are going to look at it to make sure that they can identify bugs in the system, because visualization is going to become pretty awesome after that. Once you've implemented this, marketing and growth in a technology setup is all about experimentation. So just use the system to drive insane number of A/B tests, look at the data, and keep perfecting your systems and processes to make sure that you build a robust flywheel. While it's important to remember, while the platform is automating the processes, it's the marketer that drives the strategy and the optimization. The system is only going to perform as well as you design the experiments, as you design the campaigns. So don't expect that because I put in marketing automation, my user acquisition cost is going to reduce 10x or so on and so forth. You're still going to have a job. You're still going to really think creatively about solutions, about hacking your way, about getting new users and retaining them.
Got it. And that's interesting, right? I mean, you mentioned an interesting point there. I mean, you mentioned about, getting the buy-in from your CTO and the product teams. And in a lot of companies, especially which have, achieved some kind of traction and some kind of scale, and these two functions are then separated, right? So typically you have a separate CTO, and then, they usually hire like a head of marketing or a head of growth. And then, it's kind of a little bit of, they don't share a lot of KPIs, they kind of have their own priorities. But how does that collaboration happen, right? Assume that you're, that you're like a 40, 50, 60 or 100 people company. So you've attained some traction, you've got some scale. You are at a place where you've got, these two separate functions completely cleared out or completely separated. So how do you drive that collaboration between the head of marketing or the CMO or the head of growth or whoever and your CTO or product?
Sure. So the way I've seen it in multiple times in the past is to develop growth pods. So what that means is you get a bunch of people together, typically a person who's looking after growth, a younger product manager, a single engineer, and take some time from a data analyst from the data analyst team. Bunch all these people together, not in a war room, but into a room and say, okay, start developing processes which can help my marketing scalable. The good thing about this is, unlike brand marketing, wherein you see the ROI of all your TV spends and newspaper spends probably a month or 2 months down the line. Stuff that happens in this room, you will start seeing results within 24 hours. And everyone likes the money coming in, right? So, like I said, moment you start seeing early wins, and always go for the low-hanging fruit first to show a bunch of early wins. What then happens is that because the senior leadership will have a common aligned goal to move the company forward, you will see one or two champions coming up and saying that, okay, you know what, I'm going to give you dedicated resources either in engineering or in product to start implementing more and more processes and automating them. I think that's very important, and that's only the start of the journey.
Got it. And that's interesting, right? I mean, there are companies which have these growth teams, the growth pods like you described. And then there are companies which kind of have a separate martech team itself, right? So at what scale do you think a company should actually think of creating a martech team, a separate martech team? I mean, do you even think there is value in creating a separate martech team? And if yes, at what stage of growth do you think we should be creating a separate martech team with a head of martech, with product managers, analysts, project managers, analysts, and whatnot?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a very interesting episode. So early on, I worked in startups where there were just 10 folks, and growth typically meant an engineer and an acquisition specialist. When I worked for larger setups, growth and marketing typically meant we get some time from a product manager And besides the acquisition and the data guy, we have another engineer with us. It's
Right.
only when you see your product market fit and you see, okay, now we can really step up the pedal to, to scale up. I think that's when you really need to invest, one, in a marketing technology stack like MoEngage, and secondly, you need someone to be the caretaker of this whole enormous project, because if we do not put governance at this stage and we don't build a culture around data-driven marketing at this stage, then one, uh, either the whole marketing automation spirals into something else altogether, or
Mm-hmm.
two, you see initial ROI, but after that you'll see a plateau, you'll see a local maxima pretty soon. So I would say the moment you are in the growth stage of a startup or in a company, you need to have your technology stack and your growth team in place.
Got it. Got it. And that's very interesting. And I can already see a bunch of questions coming in. So folks, if you've got any questions, feel free to type in, and we're going to pick them up at the end of the conversation. So moving on, Daman, so you mentioned about, um, the growth team. I mean, talking about the growth team and the marketing team, right? Um, So how would you go about building that growth team, right? I mean, you spoke about growth pods. I mean, just how do you go about building that? You kind of touched upon it at a high level in your earlier answers where you said, look, if it's a small team, it's just an engineer and the acquisition specialist. Um, but if you can kind of say, look, if this is the growth phase of your company, if this is the growth phase or the growth stage at which your company in, and this is the kind of growth team or the growth structure that you should be looking at. So how do you kind of map those two together, right?
Sure. So let's talk about who are the team members in a growth team, first of all.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, what do they
Apart from
eat?
the growth hackers, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a term I typically avoid because what happens is, moment you call someone a growth hacker, then what happens is everyone in the organization says growth is key responsibility hai. But
Okay.
that's never the case. So the way I envision a growth team is that obviously there'll be a growth lead or a growth manager. They will
Hmm.
be a part of that team will be a product manager who will be a full-time product manager as a part of the team, but or can be a part-time. The role
Hmm.
of the product manager here is to drive product feature for growth. What happens is the core product teams typically develop all the stuff that is core to the company's business. But this
Right.
product manager develops features which are integral to growth and marketing. And as you know, product managers typically bring engineering and design together. So
Correct.
that's the next person in the team. Have an engineer in the team who can really code stuff for you and typically have a full stack developer with you if you can. So
Hmm.
that if there's a change in the website or the backend or the database, they can get around with it very fast. While all the product and tech is being developed, you will also need a marketing specialist. Now, a
Right.
marketing specialist, the kind of marketing specialist you need on your team is depending on what you're trying to automate right early on. If it is SEO, then this marketing specialist will give the product manager a brief saying that this is how I want my content to be presented in an automated manner, or these are the number of landing pages I need. But
Hmm.
if you're looking at acquisition, then the marketing specialist will know how to buy media from Google, Facebook, and affiliates.
Got it.
Besides this, you will need someone to either double hat as a data analyst, or you need some time from a data analyst to make sure that your user journeys and behaviors and the funnels can be drawn out very easily.
Correct.
Uh, and lastly, and not to take anything from the designer, but UX plays a very important role. You'll need to make this as seamless as and low touch for the user to
Hmm.
make sure that the entire growth function stuff is a integral, looks like an integral part of the product offering. So these are the key players in a growth team. And I've seen growth teams which are just built of 3 guys to all the way growth teams which are of 15 to 20 people. And obviously this grows
Right.
as and when the organization grows. So typically, like I said, early on, just start up with a marketing specialist, an acquisition guy who's predominantly an acquisition guy, and start up with an engineer, and just borrow some time from a designer and a data analyst. Once you see
Hmm.
some traction, get a full-time product manager, because now is the time when you will start baking in things into the product and just not have a very hacker's mindset, but have something which scales up as the product grows too also. And once you hit steady state, this is when things get interesting. Now, at this
Hmm.
point in time, you divide up the entire acquisition, you divide up the entire funnel. That is acquisition, activation, retention, monetization, and referral. And you start allocating growth teams. You start splitting up the growth teams into smaller teams and say, okay, one team just looks at acquisition and activation, another one looks at retention, a third person just looks at monetization, so on and so forth. And
Hmm.
each of these teams has a product manager and an engineer and a data analyst, and this happens when you become really big as a company, and you have different kind of users coming into their system having different user journeys. So that's how you evolve. There's no point uh, you know investing right upfront in a huge team, because this team, believe me, gets its budgets as the company grows. And if you've come across uh, a model which scales, there is absolutely no dearth of budgets for the team.
Got it. Got it. And how do you actually, put this growth team together, right? I mean, because if you look at it, there are various skill sets that needs to come together, right? I mean, let's say there's somebody who's been hired as the head of growth, or somebody who's responsible for growth. Now that person has to look at the right product manager, has to make sure that they've hired the right engineer, has to make sure that they've got the right marketer. I mean, if I'm a marketing person, I know what kind of marketers I want, but do I know what kind of product people I want, or do I know what kind of engineers I want? Well, may not be. I may not be the right person to actually evaluate them. So how do you suggest you actually, if there's a growth person, how do you suggest that the growth person actually build this team? What sort of talent should they look for? How should they evaluate the fit of these different skill sets?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and this brings me to one of my favorite part of building a team, and that is team culture.
Right.
The growth team is going to fail 80% of the time.
Hmm.
So you kind of need people who have an experiment driven mindset, people who, if you tell them anything, the first thing they think is A/B testing, who know a lot of stuff but keep questioning themselves if this is the right path. Because what happens is that, because you're trying so many experiments, and I typically define a growth team success by the number of experiments that are running in a particular week, because
Got
you
it.
just need two experiments to pass for you to come up on your next growth cycle. So if I look at an engineer, and for, like I said, a full stack engineer is a given, a product manager is a given. I think the mindset is very important. You need to have a customer first mindset. You need to have an experiment driven mindset. You need to appreciate what a growth tech stack is and what it can do for you. And most importantly, the team should live and die by data, because a lot of the times our intuition says something, but a consumer insight comes out by virtue of the data that we see.
Hmm.
In such cases, the growth manager should not be married to his original experiment. He should say, okay, this hypothesis wasn't proven true by this data, so let's get on to the next thing. I think these are some of the things which are very important for driving the success of a growth team.
Got it. And that's very interesting. And you mentioned, using data to actually prove or disprove your hypothesis. And sometimes, as humans, we come with preconceived notions. We've got our own notions about customer behavior, user behavior. So, here's a little bit of an offbeat question, but can you give us an example, from your work experience where you believed something, but the data proved otherwise, right? You thought that, hey, I know this user segment, and this is what they are, but when the data came in, you're like, oh, Okay, that's not what I had in mind at all.
Sure. I mean, the fun part of handling growth is you get proven wrong every day, and you get to second guess a lot of user behavior. And
Right.
in the process of all this, you end up learning quite a lot. So there's a grocery startup that I was helping out, and the founder said, unlearn everything that you know about e-commerce, because what we do is completely different. And a typical e-commerce journey is that, okay, what more can I upsell to the user? How big can I make his basket size?
Mhm.
And over here in the grocery startup, we realized that uh, we want the user to come more often, because if the user fills up his basket with a big size, which you call stock up
Mhm.
once, the amount that he will spend with us will be lesser than if he comes to us 3 times in a week.
Mhm.
So give him a slight nudge with what else he can buy, but do not configure your processes so that he spends a lot on one go itself. Let him graduate to come into our app 3 or 4 times.
Mhm.
So I think that was a big learning for us, because we were optimizing towards trying to get the basket filled up, that is stock up instead of top up. So once we figured out that the users who are putting less in their basket end up spending more, so that's
Mhm.
when we drove a UX change, so that the user comes in, buys the stuff that he requires. Obviously, we show him the recommendation right up front for that,
Yeah.
and then he
Yeah.
gets
Interesting, interesting, and yeah, and I think it's always interesting how data proves and disproves your hypothesis and your preconceived notions. Um, but we've got a couple more questions coming in, and we'll get to them in a while. So, folks, if you have any more questions, feel free to type them in. We'll start answering them very soon. But Daman, you spoke about data, right? And today, with a lot of these touch points being digital, there's a data overload. I mean, you could literally collect millions and millions of data points. Um, so how do you actually prioritize which data to look at, right? I mean, it's not, I mean, sometimes there's data paralysis. I mean, I remember, early on, walking into a meeting with some of my bosses and their bosses, for a monthly review, and I had like 100-slide presentation, right? Because there was so much data in marketing, right? Um, so how do you actually decide? Um, how do you actually look at the data? I mean, obviously you need to have the right tool, but how do you actually decide, what sort of data do you want to collect? How do you build that culture of analyzing or looking at the right data and analyzing the right data?
that's actually something uh, which I work very closely with the analytics team with. So we use 3 words to always respond to any data request, and those 3 words are "and then what." So
Okay.
uh, typically, I see newbies who come into marketing, and folks typically who have an engineering background. They love to see a lot of data,
Right.
uh, and we get a lot of requests from the younger lot saying that ये data दे दो, ये cohort दे दो, and then I keep asking the data team that unless you're convinced, unless you reach the dead end with the "and then what" question, do not give data. So here is an example. Okay, this just happened last week. One of the team members, they wanted data at an SQ level, and we were like, okay, so then what? What will you do? Like, I'll analyze which SQs are being sold and which are not, and we're like, okay, then and then what? And he's like, I will try to sell the new SKUs. And we're like, and then what? How will you sell it? And then he realized that he doesn't have a lever to push those SKUs. There was no recommendation engine in place. It was still being built. So having data for the sake of data is something which I've seen very prevalent, but having data to for an objective is something which very few people ask. And I think that's the check that you need to build in your team, and that's the culture you need to bring in your team. Having said that, at times I encourage people to ask for data because it also helps them build intuition. Some folks in the teams are good at recognizing patterns. And when these guys ask for data, I let them loose on their own time, saying that, okay, fine, here's a SQL window, learn how to write SQL, and just keep, getting data from there and try to build your own intuition. But if you're going to overload the analytics team just just to ask for data for a bunch of things, then that's not going to work out.
Awesome. Excellent. And I think that's yeah, that's really interesting. I think you should kind of make that acronym. When people talk about ABC in marketing, right?
Mhm.
Or the AIDA type of a thing, I think you should kind of abbreviate that and call it as and then what.
And then what? Okay. No, so
Uh,
I'll tell you what happens. When you are when you're heading a team of highly motivated growth uh, individuals, there's a lot of time when data is used to point fingers, to show blame, and
yep.
to do a bunch of other things which are not productive. And we face that issue also at times. And that's why, you remember when when I talked about culture, I think having a growth mindset in the whole company is pretty important. And the growth mindset thing is something which you can wake me up in the middle of my sleep and ask me, and I'll be happy to say. So there are five main things. One is a growth mindset always prioritizes learning, because none of us knows how to grow from 1 to 100. Otherwise, we all would have made the next Apple or whatever.
Yep.
Second is always challenge your assumptions. So once you do that, it brings a lot of humility in the person in saying that, okay, I can be wrong. I mostly
Mhm.
am wrong because I'm failing 80% of the time. Third is engaging every internal resource. Suppose you are succeeding in a particular area in driving growth, make sure that whoever has helped you from other teams is made a champion of the process, because the growth team really have to struggle for resources, both time and money, from a bunch of other teams. And it's just not that a data and an engineer and a product person can come and close the loop for you. You may also need to work with a supply chain person to do 10 other things.
Right.
The fourth thing is foregoing blame. If a person is saying, okay, I can be wrong, then that mindset also comes that others can also be wrong, and you don't kick a person when he's down. And the last one is what I started out with initially, is a whole culture of experimentation. The
Mhm.
whole thesis of experimentation is that I am going to keep failing till the time I succeed. So I think these are the five principles which I inculcate a lot in my team. That if you go by these principles, then uh, even though some data may be used or abused against you, it's not going to matter in the long run.
Awesome. I think that's great. I think that's really awesome. So let's jump to the questions now. There's a bunch of questions that's come from the audience. Um, so I think there's Alok who wants to know what kind of automations have worked for you specifically for retention campaigns.
Okay, so that's a very broad question. I can speak about it for an hour.
Yeah.
So, uh,
But perhaps you can take the biggest one, whatever's worked for you the most.
okay, for retention, one of the biggest things is the moment of truth, or the aha moment. Uh, and I think the aim of the team should be to take the user as close to that as possible, and as fast as possible to the user. Let me give an example of Mobikwik. At Mobikwik, Mobikwik is a payments app, and besides payments, I mean, one of the main user acquisition strategy was recharge and bill payments. We figured out using data that if a user transacts on MobiKwik at least 3 times in the first 4 weeks, then the probability of churn reduces to less than 5%. So the whole automation engine was then devised to make sure he does the first transaction. And then we delved a bit deeper and figured out the first transaction is usually a recharge, and then the second transaction is a recharge, and third transaction is usually a bill payment of electricity or a water bill. So that's the kind of journeys we formed. We found out, okay, if this phone number is from Rajasthan, then which are the electricity providers we have in that area, start pushing him offers of them, and then so on and so forth. So I think data speaks a lot for itself, and if you can devise journeys, and again, this was one particular user journey, at any given point in time, to drive the person to the aha moment, I have at least 50 or 60 journey campaigns running. And the more segmented you make your journey campaigns, the more awesome the results are going to be.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. There's one question from Himanshu, which is about how can marketing automation help in non-digital channels, right? So, basically offline channels. So is there any example of how you have used marketing automation to kind of help with non-digital or offline or physical channels?
Oh yes, definitely. There are there are tons of stuff which coming from offline to online. Okay, the whole aim of marketing is to drive the user to your mobile app or to your website or to your service, right?
Right.
So let me give an example. Mm, yeah, this was in Line Messenger. Um, we were running a campaign which was an e-commerce campaign which was a co-partnered campaign with Google, and we were running a bunch of newspaper campaigns, and we realized that people who come from these campaigns, we need to treat them differently, and chatting is not the main thing that we want them to do, but we want them to go and experience the co-branded project that Google and we had built. So we knew the days that we were doing these campaigns, and these were especially for new users. So anyone who would sign up on those particular days and put a particular coupon code as a particular activation code at the time of signing up, their user journey was defined in a completely different way. So that's something that you can do pretty well. Sometimes, so there's another e-commerce company I was working with, and we did TV campaigns, and we mapped it to the point that, okay, I have bought this particular time slot on this particular channel, let's say at 8 p.m. And if anyone fires the app from that, we knew that he's seen the TV campaign and then fired his app. So we had that whole logic in place. If he's not opened up the app for the last 3 days and he's opened it between this time, that means he has seen the TV campaign. And that's when we would take this particular user to the TV, to the SKU of the TV ad that we were advertising at that point in time. So there's a lot of stuff that can be built, keeping offline in play too.
Yeah, so Anushri says that she's got a real estate tech product, which has a B2B and a B2C interface, kind of like Swiggy, which has a
Mhm.
restaurant interface and a consumer interface. So it's one app, but with two different sets of users.
Mhm.
Um, so the question is around how do you drive engagement through the same app for two different user sets?
Okay, so the paradigm that you want to keep in mind over here is these are two different products which manifest themselves on the same app or on the same website. So the user journeys for these two different sets of users, think of them as two different product journeys altogether. And this is something which we've seen in multiple cases. For example, if you take Amazon, an Amazon seller's user journey is very different from an Amazon consumer's user journey, and the user journey for both you'll have to create an entire retention journey and an engagement journey with the seller, and in your case the B2B player, and also with the B2C player. So treat them as two different product journeys, and that will help break the problem, and spend equal amount of time on each of these two different journeys, because both the users are pretty important to you, right? So a lot of the UX features which may be relevant to the B2C player may not be relevant to the B2B player. So you may need to figure out what you need to put in front for the first kind of user and the second kind of user, and how you drive into the to the entire journey and to the entire funnel.
Awesome, awesome, great, excellent. So, before we actually end the conversation, Daman, and thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. This has been great. I hope the audience, got as much out of it as I did. So, hey, thank you so much, Daman. Again, I really appreciate your time. It's been great talking to you.
Been a pleasure.
Awesome insights. Awesome insights, and we'd love to have you back again. And we'll continue the conversation next time.
Thank you. Lovely to be here on the webcast. Look forward to being here again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everybody who stayed on. Appreciate it. Have a great day, folks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.